Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with 36 Cancel, and this is Coco the Weiss Cat. So, players, I have a question for you. Is this a good card? How about this one? Do you think this card should go into my deck? You may have been asked or asked yourself this question many times during your Weiss Schwarz experience. The answers, however, can be very hard to pin down. What makes a good card in Weiss Schwarz is one of the most open to interpretation questions you could possibly ask. And the answers are often super contextual. There are cards that are amazing on their own, but maybe awful considering what's out there in the field. And there are cards that aren't too great, but maybe exactly what your deck needs to work. Further, there can be cards that may be worse than other cards like them, but are the best available for the set that they're in. And just in case that wasn't enough to confuse the shit out of you, there are cards that would be totally mediocre on their own, but when combined with one or two other cards, become absolute powerhouses. Bottom line, there are a ton of ways to judge whether or not a card is good, and the answer can change as time goes on. Can I give you the answer? No, absolutely not. What cards are good and what cards are garbage is a hotly debated topic among the best Weiss Schwarz players even to this day. You could get into Discord arguments that span multiple weekends about whether or not that new double rare will change the game or be a total dud, but at the very least, you can come to these conversations from an educated place. That's why, in an effort to help you get a little better at understanding Weiss Schwarz, today's lesson is about card balance in Weiss. So Weiss Schwarz is a very unique game when it comes to balancing cards. In fact, this is one of the main reasons that Weiss Schwarz is such a different beast than other card games. Ideas that are rather game agnostic, like card advantage, board control, and deck manipulation, just apply to Weiss Schwarz differently because of how different the game is structured. And the same goes for card balance. Weiss Schwarz, by design, is an open, ban-free neo-standard environment where nothing phases out of being legal and there are no play restrictions. At least, this is true for English at the time of this video's creation. Feel free to comment aged like milk once Day Day Live comes out. But all meta thoughts aside, this means that from the dawn of the game over here in the West, no cards have been banned from play, and aside from one misprint in Batman Ninja, everything released from the first Weiss Schwarz sets to the latest and the greatest are all fair game. The only limitation is that all your cards have to be from the same title and legal to play together in the same deck. And unlike other card games where the old rotates out of power and is long forgotten come the next release, Weiss Schwarz is designed so that most any set, even the older ones, have a fair shake of the stick. Now, obviously, this isn't a perfect world, and there do exist titles that are clearly outmatched and see very little play nowadays, but for the most part, if you pick up any Weiss title you like, you can put together a deck that's not going to immediately get blown out by the more modern releases, as long as you play smart. Now, if you know much about TCGs in general, it seems obvious that this would be extremely difficult to maintain while keeping new releases fun, novel, and interesting. This is why how Bushiroad, the creator of Weiss, balances its cards, is important to understand for us. Not only will this give you an idea about how your cards work and how your opponent's cards work, but it will also help you decide for yourself what makes a good card. So without further ado, let's talk about card balance in Weiss Schwarz. Meet the Weiss Schwarz Balance Scale, TM. This is the tool that Bushiroad uses to make sure that any new card is both not so broken and overpowered that it makes everything else pale in comparison, and equally not so terrible that it's totally unplayable. Naturally, this isn't true of every card. Many cards in the game aren't really good enough to be seriously considered for constructed play, but the idea is that every set will have enough of these well-balanced good cards to make a few decks from, and of course, there will be cards that stand out above others. Understanding how this scale works will help us identify these cards and why they're a cut above the rest. So how does Bushiroad design a card so it meets this criteria? Well, there are three major parts to this scale. On the right side, we have positive aspects of a card. These are things like higher power, desirable effects, and climax combos. On the left, we have the negatives. This is where we have lowered power, cost to play cards or usabilities, and a very common theme in Weiss Schwarz, drawbacks. And finally, we have the fulcrum, the center on which all cards are balanced on. This fulcrum in Weiss Schwarz is represented by what we call vanilla cards. Every Weiss Schwarz set has these, the characters with absolutely no text on them. There's nothing to balance. But they do set some baseline expectations. A vanilla level 0 will always be 3000 power, a vanilla level 1-0 will always be 5500, a vanilla 1-1 is 7k, a vanilla 2-1 is 8500, a vanilla 2-2 is 9k but has 2 soul, and a vanilla 3-2 would theoretically be 11k, but I don't think any are actually printed in the game. Vanilla 2-1s, 2-2s, and theoretically 3-2s also have a soul trigger icon. These are kind of considered the baseline, and the standard to which many cards are balanced against. If you want to add good things to a card, like more power or desirable effects, you balance that out with bad things, like undesirable effects or drawbacks, higher costs, or by lowering the power to balance out the good text. Most cards, when you balance their power and text printed on them, pretty much even out on both sides over that fulcrum. For example, take this 1-1 Yoko. She has an ability that if the character facing her is cost 0 or lower, she can't become reversed, which is really cool because she effectively won't die to many level 1s, as many that see play cost nothing. However, this comes with a big drawback, her power. Despite costing a stock to play, she's only as big as your average 1-0, so if any of those level 1s are getting any kind of power boost at all, she won't reverse them either. But lowering a card's initial power is an extremely common way that Bushiroad balances out cards with good abilities. For another example, take these two cards, Isuzu from Log Horizon and Afterparty Keiko from SAO. Both of them have the ability that if their battle opponent is level 1 or lower, they can reverse them automatically. Now both of them have lower power to balance this out, but this is still pretty strong. However, Keiko has 2000 power, while Isuzu has 3500. This is because Keiko has another ability, where on play, if you ditch a climax, you can salvage a character. This is a very desirable effect for us because it helps us filter our hand. So Keiko has two pretty good effects. Therefore, because of how they compound to make her a more powerful overall card, her power has been reduced to even smaller than a vanilla level 0. What these two cards show us, however, is that more compounding good effects printed on one card mean more downsides. To balance out the right side of the scale, Bushiroad adds things to the left. However, taking away a card's power isn't the only way Bushiroad balances a card having strong effects. There are also drawbacks. Many cards have abilities or effects on them that actually hinder them in some way, limit your options when playing them, or even help your opponent in small ways. Take this Anime Expo promo card of Simon and Nia. It's a level 0 and has 4k power, making it a really good beater. However, it has two small drawbacks for being bigger than a vanilla level 0. First, at the beginning of your climax phase, your opponent can top check, and second, when they become reversed, your opponent can choose a card in their waiting room and send it to their memory. So while this card has a lot of power, it comes at the price of giving your opponent a chance to cancel damage and also to memory compress. Now obviously, not everything balances out perfectly, and what makes a good card versus what makes a card bad often come down to the scales being tipped to the right or to the left. In this case, those drawbacks are pretty awful, especially considering that many level 0s in the game can reach 4k or 3500 power for considerably less hassle. To contrast this, let's have a look at another overstated beater with a drawback to balance her out. This is Swimsuit Megumin. Swimsuit Megumin has 3500 power, which means she's bigger than average, thus in the beater category, and she also has a pretty cool ability where when she's reversed, you put the top card of your deck into your waiting room. If it's a level 2 or higher, you can rest this card, therefore encoring her, which would normally cost a massive 3 stock. So not only is Megumin bigger than normal, well, at least in some ways, but she also has a chance of encoring herself, which is pretty damn good. But when designing her, Bushiroad also gave her a drawback. When she's on the stage, you can't play events or backups. Now this could potentially be pretty crippling. Not being able to back up your characters or play events can definitely limit your options if your deck is running them, but she's also a level 0, and there aren't many backups or events that exist at level 0. And furthermore, when we consider that we're not looking to play level 0 beaters late into the game, this drawback quickly becomes a non-issue. So being that this card has high power, a desirable effect, and a drawback that, while potentially bad for you, can be easily managed, Swimsuit Megumin is a damn good level 0. Taking these two cards, Swimsuit Megumin and Together Forever Simon and Nia, gives us examples of how drawbacks and desirable effects are balanced in different ways. Sometimes the good massively outweighs the bad, and other times it's the other way around. Both of these are level 0 beaters, just like Isuzu and Keiko were both level 1 reversers. However, understanding the way card balance works in Weiss gives us a big edge in deciding which one is better. Now we've talked about how Schwarz balances cards with power and drawbacks, but there are also costs, and I'm not just talking about how much stock a card costs to play. As an example, let's have a look at a well-known level 3, Birdcage Yukina from Bang Dream. Base 9500, and she gets plus 500 for each other music character on your turn. It's worth mentioning that giving a card conditional power, like 500 for each other character, or plus 2k during your turn, especially when it's only during certain times like the attack phase or when a climax is placed in your climax zone, is a very popular way that Bushiroad likes to balance powers on characters. She also heals on play, which is a common level 3 ability that generally only comes with a slight decrease in power as a price. Now she's also got a climax combo, which is really what I want to look at here when it comes to balancing powerful abilities on cards. When she reverses her battle opponent and you have Intense Shout in your climax zone, you can pay 3 and pitch 2 cards. If you do, you can deal 2 damage to your opponent twice. Now this is one hell of a finishing ability. On top of an attack, 2 damage sits at a nice amount where it's hard to cancel and hurts a lot. It's an extremely effective finisher. However, the cost is high. 3 stock and 2 cards is a high price already, but consider A, that you need the climax combo, and B, that you also need to reverse a battle opponent. When thinking about balance in Weiss Schwarz, considering reversing a battle opponent as part of an ability cost when it comes to how Bushiroad makes cards, as reversing a battle opponent is going to depend on the character you're facing, the stage in general, and your opponent's backups, the possible difficulties associated with it lets Bushiroad put strong abilities behind them without using other drawbacks to balance them out. This is why the reverse combo is so classic in Weiss Schwarz. For comparison, let's check out a similar and equally famous finisher. Last Shot Sinon. She's 10k and also heals on play, but her combo is a little different. When she attacks, if Phantom Bullet is in your climax zone, you can pay 2 and pitch a card. If you do, deal 4 damage to your opponent. If this damage is cancelled, she gets plus 3k power until the end of your opponent's next turn, and if she's reversed, she goes straight to memory, so she cannot be encored. So comparing the two, both of them are on-play healers and deal 4 total damage with their combos, but Last Shot Xenon's combo is a lot cheaper and it's on attack, meaning you don't have to reverse anything. Why is that? Well, it's because 4 damage is a lot easier to cancel than 2 damage, and she also has the memory clause. Do you kind of see how things balance out here? Both of these characters heal on play, have about the same base power, and have a blue climax combo. Dealing 4 damage all at once though, on top of the possibility of not getting any power boosts, is more inconsistent than dealing 2 twice. Therefore, it's less expensive cost-wise both in stock and in reversing an opponent. Both of these famous finishers are well-known names in the game, and even though both of them are from different sets and have totally different flavor and effects, you kind of see how they're balanced using the same criteria. Just to hammer this home, let's have a look at yet another blue finisher, Gushing Flame Shizu, the trial deck level 3 from Slime. On play, you can top check X where X is characters, and then she has an on-attack ability, pay 3, pitch 2, burn 5. So let's compare this to our 2 other finishers. Like them, she deals a hefty amount of damage and requires you to discard cards and pay stock to do it. Now, she doesn't heal, but rather top checks, so all of these cards have supplementary helpful abilities. She's also 10k power, but unlike the other 2 finishers, she has no inherent way of getting bigger. As for her damage, it's similar but different. On attack, you can pay 3 and pitch 2 and then burn 5, and this is the same cost as Birdcage Yukina, however it doesn't require reversing your battle opponent or a climax combo, so if anything, this is more like Last Shot Xenon, but without the combo. And since not needing a climax lowers the cost on your balance scale, not only is this ability more expensive to activate, but it's also 5 damage, which has an extremely high chance of being cancelled. Because of how she's balanced, Gushing Flame Shizu is mostly relegated to the role of secondary finisher at best, and she doesn't have her name close in fame to cards like Birdcage Yukina or Last Shot Xenon, even though these are all somewhat similar cards. But are you starting to get a sense of balance? By comparing some of these similar cards and putting them on these scales, how Weiss cards are balanced should be at least a bit more clear. In Weiss, even though the flavor might be slightly different, there are many common abilities between titles. The variations placed on those abilities can easily make or break a card though, so having a bar to compare them to is important when deciding whether or not a card is good. So all of that said, let's go over what we've learned. First, any given Weiss set, while different in flavor and playstyle, has many similar abilities that you'll find in many different sets. These can be anything from level 0 drop searchers, tap self-searching brainstormers, to on-attack and reverse burns. By comparing and contrasting these abilities across sets, we can get an idea of how they're balanced, what they should cost, and how good they are. Secondly, and largely the point of the video, we talked about the Weiss balance scale. Since all of these sets are designed in the same way to work in the same environment, all the cards in the game are balanced using criteria related to this scale. Everything is balanced over the fulcrum, which is made of vanilla cards, or cards with no text on them, that lay out the base expectations as to how powerful a card should be based on its level and cost. Adding good abilities to a card, or giving it more power, tips the scale towards the right. In order to balance this, Bushiroad adds demerits, drawbacks, or reductions in base power to the left side of the scale. Weighing a card's good attributes against its drawbacks over what we should expect from a card with its cost and level will give you a good idea of how powerful it is. While most cards fall somewhere between the very near left or right of the fulcrum, and thus are not very notable in power, there are many exceptions. When you see a card that has a lot of good attributes on the right side of the scale, and not many drawbacks in power or in demerits, there's a good chance that that card is a scale breaker. Further, Bushiroad also likes to use fake drawbacks that aren't very consequential in the context where the card is used. Examples of this include taking away power but adding it back so long as you fulfill very easy conditions, or adding on abilities that would make the card difficult to synergize with other cards or combos that you probably wouldn't run together with it anyway. Cards that have a lot of good elements and drawbacks that don't really affect its overall strength turn out to be some of the most powerful cards on the scale. And finally, the last thing I want you to take away from this video, and honestly the most important, is this. Even if we have some basic ways to compare the strength of cards in Weiss, what makes a good card in any TCG is almost completely subjective. There are, of course, some obvious exceptions where a card is so amazingly good or so abysmally awful that it's hard to debate, but anything between those two extremes is a vast expanse of gray area, and in Weiss it can get even more hairy. Cards that are very strong in the balance scale might not be good against what's currently being thrown around in the current meta, and cards that seem awful on their own might just be what the doctor ordered for other cards to become amazing. Ultimately, the best way to find out if a card is good or not is to experiment. Experimentation and learning through experience are going to teach you what cards are good better than any YouTube video ever could. And then what you can do is take your experiences and discuss them with others. Talk about your plays, what went wrong or what worked, and build theories. In other words, players, I'm telling you the same thing I always do. Get out there and play some Weiss. Alright players, that's where I'm going to wrap things up. I know I didn't give you a magic formula to decide whether a card is good, but that's because there isn't one. However, I hope that the basic information I've relayed here can give you a little more context when you pick up a card and ask yourself, is this a good card? And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.